16 different 911 calls. 2 weeks of mounting panic. One house in paradise. And inside, a horror that would redefine what we think we know about family.
911, what's your emergency?
I'm calling about my relatives. We haven't heard from them in weeks.
This is Celebration, Florida, a master-planned community created near Disney World. With tree-lined streets and family-friendly neighborhoods, it was designed as the perfect place to raise children. But in January 2020, this picture-perfect town became the backdrop for one of the most disturbing family murders in recent history. For over 2 weeks, family, friends, federal agents, and law enforcement desperately searched for answers. Where was the Todt family? Why had they vanished without a trace from their reserve at Celebration home? What investigators found when they finally entered that house would haunt them forever. 4 bodies. A respected physical therapist living among them for weeks. And confessions so contradictory and twisted that they challenged everything we understand about family, faith, and the ultimate betrayal of trust. This is the story of how a Connecticut physical therapist became a family killer, how paradise became a tomb, and how one man's delusions destroyed the very lives he claimed to be protecting. If stories like this make you wonder what really happens behind closed doors, make sure you subscribe to Crime Echoes. Every week, we uncover the cases that reveal the hidden dangers inside seemingly perfect families. Anthony Todt, 46 years old, was a licensed physical therapist who had built a practice in Connecticut before moving his family to Celebration, Florida. He lived at 202 Reserve Place with his wife Megan, 42, who homeschooled their 3 children. 13-year-old Alec was the eldest, a bright boy with his whole future ahead of him. Tyler, 11, was known for his infectious smile and love of adventure. And little Zoe, just 4 years old, was the baby of the family, a tiny girl with pigtails who lit up every room she entered. The family also had a dog that lived with them in their Celebration home. Celebration was founded by the Walt Disney Company as a master-planned community emphasizing family values and safety. With its proximity to Disney World and well-maintained neighborhoods, it attracted families seeking a perfect suburban lifestyle. The Todt family had moved from Connecticut to Florida, joining the thousands of families who saw Celebration as the perfect place to build their American dream. When families move to communities specifically designed for safety and family life, we assume they're seeking happiness and security. But as we'll see with the Todt family, sometimes the most dangerous threats come from within the family itself. What signs should communities watch for when families suddenly become isolated? Anthony Todt appeared to be living the American dream. He ran a physical therapy practice back in Connecticut, helping patients recover from injuries and rebuild their lives. To his clients, he was compassionate, professional, someone they trusted with their physical well-being. But there was something else about Anthony that few people knew. He carried a dark family legacy that may have shaped everything that came next. In 1980, when Anthony was just 4 years old, his father was convicted of hiring a former student to murder Anthony's mother. The assassination attempt failed. Anthony's mother survived the shooting. But court records show that Anthony's father, a teacher, had paid a former student to kill his wife. This traumatic family history of attempted murder within his own bloodline would later be cited as a significant factor in Anthony's psychological development. Growing up with the knowledge that his own father had tried to have his mother killed left psychological scars that mental health experts say may have influenced Anthony's later actions. Stories like this remind us how early trauma can shape dangerous behavior later in life. What no one in Celebration knew was that Anthony was struggling with more than just childhood trauma. By 2019, he was facing serious legal troubles that threatened to destroy everything he had built. He was under federal investigation for healthcare fraud related to his physical therapy practice in Connecticut. Federal investigators accused Anthony of scamming the healthcare system, billing for treatments that never happened and overcharging for the ones that did. It was fraud on a serious scale. Court records reveal that Anthony Todt already knew federal agents were circling. Investigators had been scrutinizing his physical therapy practice in Connecticut, accusing him of years of insurance fraud. He was staring down the possibility of prison time and the total collapse of his reputation. The financial and legal pressure was mounting. Anthony's professional license was at risk, his income was threatened, and he faced the possibility of federal prosecution. For a man who had built his identity around being a healthcare provider and family protector, this investigation represented the collapse of everything he had worked for. But while Anthony was dealing with federal investigators during the day, he was developing disturbing beliefs about protecting his family from what he saw as an increasingly dangerous world. These beliefs would soon turn deadly, but nobody in his picture-perfect community had any idea what was brewing behind closed doors. In December 2019, the Todt family seemed to vanish from their normal lives. Family members in Connecticut began trying to reach them through phone calls, text messages, and social media. There was no response. This wasn't typical behavior for the family. Megan had been in regular contact with relatives, and the sudden silence was immediately concerning to those who knew them well. According to official reports, the concern was so significant that it generated 16 separate 911 calls. These calls came from family members in Connecticut, friends who couldn't reach them, law enforcement officers conducting welfare checks, federal agents involved in Anthony's case, and even a caretaker who was supposed to help with the children. Each call represented growing desperation from people who knew something was seriously wrong. The Todt family had simply disappeared from all normal communication and activity. These cases remind us that danger can be building quietly while no one notices. Subscribe to Crime Echoes for more real-life cases that will stay with you long after they're over. At the family's celebration home, physical signs of abandonment began accumulating. Mail piled up in boxes on the front porch. The usually pristine lawn began to show signs of neglect. Neighbors in the reserve at Celebration community noticed the unusual quiet from a house that had previously been active with children's voices and normal family activity. Most telling was an eviction notice that was eventually posted on the front door of the home. The family was behind on rent, and property management had taken legal steps to reclaim the residence. When you notice neighbors who suddenly become completely inactive, no sounds, no activity, no response to attempts at contact, how long should you wait before taking action? The people searching for the Todt family were making calls for over 2 weeks. In hindsight, was that too long? The search for the Todt family involved multiple law enforcement agencies across different states. Connecticut authorities, where Anthony's practice was located, were coordinating with Florida law enforcement and federal agents. FBI agents, who were already involved in the healthcare fraud investigation, became part of the missing persons inquiry. This wasn't just local concern, it was a coordinated effort involving federal resources. Family members provided detailed information about the last known communications with the Todts. They described Anthony's behavior in final conversations as somewhat unusual, but nothing that clearly predicted the horror that investigators would eventually discover. January 13, 2020. For more than 2 weeks, family, friends, and law enforcement had been trying to solve the mystery of the Todt family's disappearance. Finally, with an eviction notice on the door and mounting concerns, Osceola County Sheriff's deputies decided to enter the home. What they found would haunt even seasoned investigators. The smell hit them first, the unmistakable odor of decomposition. And then they saw him. Anthony Todt, wandering through his own house, shaking strangely, as if he was in some kind of trance. Room by room, investigators made the grisly discoveries that confirmed their worst fears. In the beds throughout the house, wrapped in blankets, were the decomposing bodies of Megan, Alec, Tyler, and little Zoe. The forensic evidence painted a horrific picture. Autopsies confirmed each victim had suffered fatal stab wounds to the abdomen, delivered with severe force. But the horror didn't end there. Toxicology tests revealed that all 4 victims had toxic levels of Benadryl in their systems. The levels were far beyond anything accidental, they had been poisoned before they were stabbed. Perhaps most disturbing was the staging of the scene. Each victim was found with crucifixes gripped in their hands. This wasn't random, it was deliberate positioning that suggested the killer was trying to create a specific religious narrative around the deaths. The family dog had also been killed, though the exact method wasn't specified in official reports. Every living member of the household had been murdered. But the most disturbing aspect of this case wasn't just what Anthony had done, it was what he continued to do afterward. When deputies arrived, Anthony told them his wife was upstairs sleeping. But Megan wasn't sleeping. She had been dead for weeks, decomposing in the master bedroom alongside her children. Based on the advanced state of decomposition, medical examiners determined that the victims had been dead for weeks. This meant that Anthony Todt had been living in the house with their bodies throughout the entire period when family and friends were desperately trying to locate them. One of the children's remains had decomposed to the point where identification was initially difficult. The extended time between death and discovery had created additional trauma for investigators and family members. Think about this for a moment. While neighbors wondered where the family had gone, while mail piled up and concerns grew, Anthony was going about his daily routine, eating, sleeping, existing, in a house that had become a tomb. For weeks, he had lived with the smell, the sight, the reality of what he had done. It raises chilling questions about his mental state and his complete disconnection from normal human emotion. When questioned about this extended period, Anthony showed little emotion and seemed detached from the reality of what investigators were discovering. His demeanor was described as eerily calm given the circumstances. How does someone live with decomposing bodies for weeks? What kind of psychological state allows someone to exist in such horror? These questions haunted investigators and continue to puzzle mental health experts who study extreme criminal behavior. When police took Anthony into custody, what he told them was as disturbing as the crime itself. He claimed that he had killed his family because he believed the apocalypse was coming. In his twisted mind, they all needed to pass over to the other side together. According to his initial confession, Anthony told investigators he poisoned his wife and children with large doses of Benadryl, then stabbed each to make sure they were dead. But there was another element to Anthony's confession that made it even more disturbing. He had placed crucifixes in each victim's hands after killing them. He told investigators that he placed them in his family members' hands as part of what he saw as their spiritual transition. In his mind, he was facilitating their journey to the afterlife before the world became too dangerous for innocent souls. He wasn't just talking about the end of the world, the religious symbols showed just how far his mind had gone into delusion. I want you to pause for a moment and think about this. How does a father convince himself that killing his own children is an act of love? What kind of mental state leads someone to believe that murder is mercy? Comment below with your thoughts, because this case raises disturbing questions about how far delusion can take someone. Stories like this are difficult to hear, but they're important. Subscribe to Crime Echoes. Together we look deeper into these cases to understand the psychology behind unthinkable crimes. But as the legal process continued, Anthony's story began to change. The man who had initially confessed to killing his family suddenly had a different version of events. And this new story was even more twisted than the first. In a letter written from jail, Anthony completely recanted his confession. Now, he claimed, it was actually his wife Megan who had killed the children. According to this new version, Megan had poisoned and stabbed their 3 kids, then killed herself by drinking Benadryl and stabbing herself in the abdomen. Anthony painted himself as another victim, a man who had simply discovered his family's bodies and was too traumatized to call for help. He claimed he had been living with the bodies not out of callousness, but out of shock and disbelief. This complete contradiction of his initial confession raised serious questions about his mental state and his attempts to avoid responsibility for his actions. But investigators weren't buying Anthony's new story. The forensic evidence told a very different tale that contradicted Anthony's second story. Medical examiners testified that the stab wounds could not have been self-inflicted, particularly given the locations and angles of the injuries. The systematic poisoning of all 4 victims with precise lethal doses of Benadryl indicated careful planning and execution, not a spontaneous murder-suicide by Megan as Anthony claimed. As the investigation continued, the real picture of Anthony Todt's life began to emerge. This wasn't just about apocalyptic beliefs or religious mania. Anthony was facing serious financial problems. His physical therapy business was struggling, and he was under federal investigation for healthcare fraud. The perfect family in the perfect community was built on a foundation of lies. Anthony had been living beyond his means, and the walls were closing in. Investigators believe that rather than face the consequences of his actions, he chose to destroy everything, including his innocent family. The crucifixes in his victims' hands weren't symbols of salvation. They were Anthony's attempt to stage a scene that would support his twisted narrative about religious delusion. Even in death, he was trying to manipulate the truth. On April 14, 2022, nearly 2.5 years after the murders, Anthony Todt finally faced justice. The trial revealed the full scope of his calculated cruelty and the devastating impact on all who knew and loved the Todt family. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence. The autopsy results showing both Benadryl poisoning and fatal stab wounds. The timeline proving Anthony had been the only one who could have committed the murders. The forensic evidence that demolished his claims about Megan being responsible. The defense tried to paint Anthony as a man driven to madness by financial stress and family history. They pointed to his father's attempted murder of his mother decades earlier, suggesting that Anthony was doomed to repeat the cycle of violence. But the jury wasn't swayed by excuses or psychological explanations. After hearing all the evidence, they delivered their verdict, guilty on 4 counts of first-degree murder. Anthony Todt would spend the rest of his life in prison, with no possibility of parole. Justice was served for the Todt family, but their story highlights critical issues about family violence and mental health that we all need to understand. Subscribe to Crime Echoes to stay informed about cases that shape our understanding of justice and prevention. But this case was never really about Anthony Todt. It was about 4 innocent lives stolen by someone who was supposed to protect them. Megan Todt was more than just a victim. She was a devoted mother who homeschooled her children and created a warm, loving home. Alec, at 13, was just beginning to discover who he was becoming. Tyler, 11, had a curiosity about the world that would never be satisfied. And Zoe, barely 4 years old, had a lifetime of first days, birthdays, and achievements that would never come. Friends described Megan as someone who always put her children first. She had trusted her husband completely, never imagining that the man she had built a life with was capable of such horror. They described Anthony's attempt to blame her as a final act of cruelty toward a woman who had already suffered the ultimate betrayal. The murders shattered the sense of safety that had defined Celebration. This was supposed to be Disney's perfect community, a place where families came to live out their dreams. How could such horror happen in paradise? Neighbors who had wondered about the quiet house, who had seen the piling mail and grown concerned, now wondered if they could have done more. The tragedy raised painful questions about how well we really know the people living next door. Memorial services were held, not just for the victims, but for the community's lost innocence. Celebration would never be quite the same. The house where the murders occurred stands as a reminder that evil can hide behind even the most perfect facades. The Anthony Todt case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about family violence, mental health, and the warning signs that often go unrecognized. Financial stress, social isolation, and untreated trauma can create dangerous conditions. But perhaps most importantly, this case reminds us that domestic violence doesn't always look like what we expect. There were no police reports, no visible bruises, no documented threats. Sometimes the most dangerous person is the one who seems the most normal. What do you think could have been done to prevent this tragedy? How do we identify families in crisis before it's too late? And what responsibility do we have as community members to watch out for each other? Understanding cases like this isn't just about true crime, it's about recognizing patterns that could save lives. If you believe in the importance of awareness and prevention, join the Crime Echoes community by subscribing. Together, we can learn from these tragedies to protect future families. Anthony Todt will spend the rest of his life behind bars, but no amount of prison time can bring back Megan, Alec, Tyler, and Zoe. Their story serves as a tragic reminder that the greatest threat to family safety often comes from within. In Celebration, Florida, a community built on dreams of perfection, 4 lives were lost to one man's ultimate act of selfishness. As we remember the Todt family, we must also commit to recognizing the warning signs, supporting struggling families, and ensuring that no parent ever again sees murder as a solution to their problems. The Todt family deserves to be remembered for the love they shared, not the way their lives ended. How do you think we can better protect families from this kind of hidden violence? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching, and for remembering Megan, Alec, Tyler, and Zoe Todt.